Hello everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel called Living in Hayward, Wisconsin, where we talk about all things real estate related and also just about living in Hayward and what that's like. I'm Audrey Miller. I'm the broker owner of Northwest Wisconsin Realty Team. We're located right on Main Street in Hayward, so stop in sometime if you'd like. Today we got a little change of venue. I often record my videos at my home office, but today I'm in my actual office in Hayward. We take turns being on floor time here, so I'm here today and thought I would record the video while I'm spending some time at the office today. So you get to see a little bit of it. I have a full video of our office somewhere in my YouTube channel videos. But anyway, today we're going to talk a little bit about what to expect on closing day and a couple of days prior to that, leading up to closing. Sometimes there becomes a little bit of ambiguity with who handles what. Not that there's not a process. What I meant is that buyers and sellers are sometimes a little bit confused about that, and maybe that's my problem as the agent not educating properly. But I just thought I'd do a video kind of what to expect and who the players are that are involved in things as of closing day. So hopefully you find this helpful. If you like my channel, feel free to subscribe, share, comment. I love to hear from viewers. If you need help with buying or selling, I am a listing and lakefront expert, so I would be happy to hear from you and to work with you. I cover an area about 45 minutes in any direction from Hayward. So, all right, let's get into it. So obviously, as far as closing day, transactions can vary a bit depending on whether there's a lender involved or whether it's a cash offer. But the basic process goes like this. About 3 to 4 days before closing, your agent should reach out to you with the utility provider information for the property so that you can get the utilities switched over into your name as of closing day. This typically involves electric company, maybe an LP gas, propane. If there's natural gas, that may need to be switched over. I personally don't provide this information until we're getting very close to closing, in case we're going to be moving up the closing date or having to delay the closing for some reason. I don't want people calling all these utilities and then having to call them back. So typically just a few days before closing, your agent should be getting that information over to you if they haven't already. And if they haven't, you'd want to reach out and ask about that. And then the title company actually plays a much bigger role in the closing process than your agent does. So obviously up until that point, your agent's been the one who's walking you through everything, showing you properties or listing your home for you, kind of working with you on negotiations, all of that through the inspection processes, appraisal, everything like that. But when it comes to the actual closing and coordinating of the closing, that is done directly with the title company and not so much with your agent. We kind of get kept in the loop on that, or if something needs to change with the closing date, obviously the agent is the one to talk to. And it doesn't hurt to just reach out to your agent first and say, hey, what about this or that? How do I coordinate closing? That's totally fine. But you will have been getting correspondences from the title company shortly after you went under contract, and they will actually be your point of contact for coordinating the actual closing. So you can work directly with the title company to figure out what day and time works, whether you're pre-signing or signing on the day of closing. Pre-signing has gotten to be a really big thing, and it's actually kind of uncommon these days to have both the buyer and seller at the closing table at the same time. It used to be pre-COVID, we typically were in person. Agents would be there, the buyer, the seller. It's kind of like a big, little celebration for everybody being there at one time. But that has become less and less common. As we went through COVID, we realized how handy it was to do remote closings and how much flexibility that brought with people's schedules. So that a lot of that happens these days. So let's say you're closing on a Friday. A lot of closings tend to happen on Fridays because then the buyer can get into the house for the weekend. The closing is on Friday. As a buyer, if you are a cash buyer, you can actually do everything remotely via DocuSign. You can sign your documents. There's nothing that needs what we call a wet signature. And then you can wire your funds. The funds for closing have to be either wired or a cashier's check, and then they will be dispersed that same way to the seller, either a wire or a cashier's check. Those are considered to be the two completely verifiable, reliable methods of payment. So the seller may choose to pre-sign on Wednesday for a Friday closing, and then the buyer may choose to attend in person on Friday. Sometimes the seller might be closing remotely from another state, and then the buyer also closes remotely at a completely different location. This is one of the reasons why I love Knightberry Title. Just a plug for Renee and her team at Knightberry. They're awesome, but they have a lot of different offices spread around the area. So one person might be able to close in person in Rosemont, Minnesota, and another one is closing in person in Hayward, for example. So the title company, though, will coordinate all of that and let you know when you can sign, or you can tell them when you're available to sign. A deed does need a wet signature, so a seller has to sign in person for that, but that can also be done remotely. You just need to then next day air the documents back. There's another thing that's become really common, which is a remote notary. So essentially, the notary comes to your house. There's an extra charge for this, but it's minimal in the scope of things, maybe $125 or $150. So the remote notary will actually come to your home, sit down with you, sign the documents. You'll sign the documents, and then the remote notary will send it back to the title company via next day air. But if you're closing remotely, you'll want to be talking to the title company and planning ahead on this by at least a few days to a week to ensure that everything is coordinated so that closing can go off without a hitch on the final day. And if you're a buyer and you're wiring funds, you want to be doing that at least 1 day prior. Don't worry, your funds will not get dispersed till the seller has signed the deed and everything is done. But wires can take 12 to 24 hours. A lot of times they're not instantaneous. So you definitely want to be wiring your funds ahead of time. If you're bringing in a cashier's check, I would say you want to obtain that the day before closing and then bring that with you to the closing. Obviously, if you're closing remotely as a buyer, you have to wire funds. You can't do the cashier check option in that case. Just a couple of other things. The one thing that also happens right around closing is the walkthrough, which is the buyer's final walkthrough. That has to be within 3 days of closing per the contract, but typically that's done either day of or maybe the evening before closing, depending on people's schedules. And that's simply to verify that the house is in the same condition as when you last saw it, and that the seller has removed all the items that they were supposed to remove from the property. Sometimes buyers feel comfortable to have their agent go and do this on their behalf or do a FaceTime with them if they can't be there in person, but most buyers choose to attend the pre-closing walkthrough in person so they can just see the place for themselves before they turn over their money. Sellers need to be out of the property by midnight of the day before closing per the offer. But a lot of times a buyer will allow the seller to be there the night before closing, and the seller will vacate first thing in the morning so that they don't have to be going and getting a hotel for overnight. But all of these things are very easy to coordinate. You just have to know who to reach out to for what. Obviously, your agent's going to be helping you with the walkthrough and that kind of thing. And then, if you're closing in person, you just arrive at the title company a few minutes before your scheduled time. If you have lending paperwork, that's going to actually take the majority of your time in terms of signing. There's a lot of paperwork when you're getting a loan. The actual real estate documents take very little time. So a cash deal, you could be closed in 10 or 15 minutes. If you're doing lending, I would expect probably 45 minutes to an hour. And then we coordinate the keys, like we either get them to the title company for you to take with you at closing if your agent isn't attending the closing, or we figure out somewhere to leave them on the property and give you that information after the closing has been completed. Sometimes the seller will bring the keys to the title company and they'll be there if they're closing at the same time as the buyer. So yeah, it usually goes quite smoothly, and everybody, ends up knowing where they need to be and when. If in doubt, ask your agent. Sometimes I'll just refer you back to the title company if I know that it's something that I don't need to be in the middle of, and they can help you to coordinate. But just a couple of quick stories from closings. Like I said, most of them go pretty smoothly, but I did have one where the buyers didn't realize that they needed to wire their funds the day before. So they were sitting at the closing table attempting to wire their funds, there was two problems they ran into. One was there was a limit with their bank on how much they could wire at one time. And secondly, it was not an instantaneous type of wire. So that caused a big problem. I won't get into all the details of how we solved it, but we ended up being able to still close that day. But it was quite stressful for everyone, especially since they were planning to host family that weekend and planning to stay at their new home and all of that. And then as far as a final walkthrough, very early in my career, I had some buyers who said, you know what, we don't need to do a final walkthrough. We're happy with it. It's out of our way to go there. Let's just skip it. And I said, okay, that's your call, if you want to do that. Well, they closed, paid their money. They got to the house and there was a gas leak. They ended up having to get out of the house, have the utility company come and fix it, which took like a day or more. They had to go get a hotel. It was kind of a nightmare. Ever since that experience, very early on in my career, I always encourage people to do the final walkthrough. Once in a while, people choose to skip it and that's their prerogative, but I tell them, I would just highly recommend it. There's always something new every day in real estate. It's one of the things I love about this career. But yes, there's been some interesting situations over the years, and I'm sure someone at a title company could tell you a lot more. But overall, check with your agent, check with the title company, make sure you get your paperwork signed ahead of time or that you're there on time on the day of closing, and it should all be a pretty smooth process for you.